It just seems like there's the odd song that we don't sing enough. Or something. Maybe it's the key we sing it in, I'm not sure. Some of them are a bit of a challenge. Anyways, it's very good to see you, brothers and sisters, again. If we haven't had a chance to say hello to you, this is official, but please, we'd like to chat with you a little bit after the meeting as well, too. We came to talk this evening a little bit about how forward-moving Jehovah's organization is. You know, there's some very interesting things that are happening. I don't know if you heard out of the annual meeting this year, but there was a very special announcement that's close to my heart. They have arranged for a 2-month course for the traveling overseers starting in the spring at Patterson, New York. So I had a hard time not being happy about that. But you might say, well, that's fine for you, Brother Badley. But, you know, it's good for you brothers and sisters, too, because the training that we'll receive, of course, will benefit the congregations as well. So we're looking forward to that. We don't know when we'll be invited to go, but the course does start. They're going to send 48 at a time, apparently. Cheryl says she was hoping they do it by alphabetical order. Badley's pretty close to the beginning of the alphabet. We did hear, though, that they were thinking of sending the more junior circuit overseers first, so that's good too. Either way, we kind of fit in there, so that works out nice. Something else too there's been a big hurrah about is that the Society announced in the January Kingdom Ministry that the regular pioneer hours are being reduced to 840 a year. That's 70 hours a month. And auxiliary pioneering to 50 hours. And I think it's really a reflection, isn't it, brothers, of the fact that the Society has seen that we live a more complicated life these days, and the extra time will allow more to be on the list. And we're anticipating that more will, in fact, do that. Will get on the list. And those who are presently on the list, of course, will feel a bit of relief because of that. But it's all designed for the purpose of keeping going in full-time service. So it's good to see those adjustments. And as I said, you see, it's part of the organization always being on the move, always forward-looking, and caring for us, really. And it's kind of like our theme this evening. If you think back to September, we had our Special Assembly Day program, and the theme of that program was Show Appreciation for Jehovah's Table. Hopefully you still remember some of the things that were said there. Do you remember exactly the thrust of that Assembly Day program? You see, the Society really wanted us to give thought to how we show appreciation for Jehovah's Table. It was essential to our life, whether it's through our meeting attendance or through our personal study or through our ministry. We needed to really think about showing appreciation. And did you notice the theme for my part this evening? Regularly feeding at Jehovah's table. Now, why? Well, you see, the Society realizes that we have to keep talking about these things because, you know, brothers, quite frankly, in Canada, we tend to be quite distracted. There are so many things that we can involve ourselves in, and it has distracted us spiritually. So this evening we're going to talk about it again, but I'm going to put a little different spin on it, hopefully, for you this evening, just so that, well, for the purpose that you will give additional thought to this idea about feeding spiritually. So just think about this for a moment. Have you ever heard the expression, you are what you eat? Now, tends to be true, doesn't it? You know, if you go to a grocery store and you see someone with a grocery cart packed full of Coke and chips and all kinds of junk food, what do you expect the person pushing the cart to look like? Now, I'm not going to answer that for you. You decide for yourself, but it probably tells you something. You probably have an image in your mind because you are what you eat. It's true. Yeah, some say, well, what difference does it make as long as you eat something? Maybe some of our young folks figure, well, you know, what's wrong with chips and chocolate bars? But just think about this for a moment. Do you realize that your body has to replace 1 trillion, that's 1 trillion body cells every day? And they range from such things as skin cells and nail cells, blood cells, hair cells, cells of the internal organs, hormones, neurochemicals, and all of those have to be replaced at various times, either in the day or during your life. And so obviously you can't just have, a couple of elements there. You have to have them all. Otherwise, you know what happens, don't you? Well, you get sick. Over a long period of time, the body becomes deficient and we get ill. So a balanced diet is essential. But what's interesting? The Healthful Eating magazine said, food appears to be one of the most abused possessions. And many of you who have tried to be healthy realize that there's probably a lot of things in our diet in the Western world that has caused us tremendous problems. But you realize, though, that it's really very little different when it comes to spiritual things, to spiritual food. You remember what Paul said? Keep holding the pattern of healthful words that you heard from me. So he outlined, didn't he, that there's words that are not healthy and words that are. There's ideas that are healthy and ideas that are not. There's thinking that's healthy and thinking that's not. And we have to make sure that spiritually we think and feed ourselves on what's healthy spiritually. It's kind of interesting, though, Paul was very concerned about his brothers back in the first century. And if you take your Bible and turn to Hebrews chapter 5, you'll notice something very interesting and unique here. You see, when it comes to growing up physically, even if you didn't eat all that well, one thing you can be sure of is that as long as you don't die, you will grow to maturity physically. That will happen. But notice what Paul says here in Hebrews chapter 5 about spiritual growth. And to just notice verse 12, for it says there, indeed, although you ought to be teachers in view of the time, you again need someone to teach you from the beginning the elementary things of the sacred pronouncements of God. And you've become such as need milk, not solid food. For everyone that partakes of milk is unacquainted with the word of righteousness, for he is a babe. Now that's a kind of an interesting statement, because you notice he said here that for some of them back there, they had been in the truth long enough that they should have been teachers. They should have progressed to become adult teachers, mature. But you notice he said there that some of them were still babes. They're still drinking the milk, skimming the top. And so that's the difference between poorly eating physically and poorly eating spiritually. You see, if you don't eat properly spiritually, you will never grow to maturity. Or it could happen, which is different than physical too, is that once you grow to maturity, it may be that you could revert back to being an infant. That's kind of scary to think that. But it's quite possible. That's what Paul was outlining here for us. And that's why it's so important, brothers, that we think about this again, about our spiritual eating habits. Do you eat well spiritually? Do you? Do you allow it to change how you think and how you feel about things? Do you check your thoughts and your attitudes to see, do they measure up with what Jehovah says? Or do I have my own ideas about things? You see, the world pressures us to do that. And some will say, well, we come to the meetings, we hear the same thing over and over again. And the longer we're in the truth, the more likely we are to have that happen, where we'll say, oh yeah, well, here we are talking about making return visits again. Hopefully you didn't think that this evening. But here's something to think about. How many of you here are wearing a watch? Now, I don't want you to look at it, okay? But just think about your watch for a minute. Now, does your watch have hands, or is it digital? If it has hands, does it have a second hand? And when the second hand moves around your face of your clock, does it move like that, or does it move smoothly? Where's the logo on your watch? Is it at the top? Is it in the middle, on the center, down the bottom? Is it over to one side? Is the face of your watch oval, or is it round, or is it rectangular? I want to tell you something about your watch. Don't look at it. Do you realize that if you looked at your watch every half hour during the waking time of your life, you would look at your watch 11,680 times in 1 year? How long have you had your watch? So you should know it pretty good. Now, and sometimes, you look at your watch maybe every 2 minutes when you're waiting for somebody. You're waiting for your wife, and it's, where is she? And so you should know it. So just take a look at your watch for a moment. Just see how closely you know your watch. And remember, 11,680 times you looked at your watch. Did you get it exactly right? Well, maybe some of you did. I know that some of you didn't. Yeah. Do you know what that tells us? That we're not necessarily that observant. And that's true with spiritual things. You see, we come to the Kingdom Hall and we say, we've talked about that before. Oh, there's nothing new. Yeah, I've heard that before. Well, it's kind of like our watch. But we didn't necessarily get it with the watch either. And we don't always get it spiritually unless we really concentrate and think about it and try to figure out, now, what is this information going to mean for me today or this week or in my life as things have changed? By the way, who can tell me what time it is? Oops. We're so observant, aren't we? And so spiritually it's like that too, brothers. So never fall into the trap of saying, I've heard that before. I've read that before. Because it'll be exactly the same. You will be missing something that you need presently. That's why Jehovah continues to teach us. So we're going to talk about a few things that we might just examine that help us to see how we're doing in this regard spiritually too. Because, brothers, our thinking is under attack. Satan wants us to think differently. He wants to distract us, and there are too many distractions in our world already. They do distract us, and they slowly wear away our thinking, and they can even revert our attitudes back to the thinking of the world. So let's think about this for a moment. The world likes to tell us that these days that everybody's a victim. You ever heard that? They're always talking about people being a victim of this and a victim of that. And is that true? Are people victims? You bet. We're all victims, aren't we? Not one of us wanted to be in this position of being imperfect. We're all victims. But when the world says it, many times what they're doing is giving people a way out so that they don't have to be responsible for their lives. And, that's because you were a victim. And that's because you were a victim. And so, we realize you can't do anything about that. Is that what the Bible teaches? Well, just take your copy of the Bible and turn to the 34th Psalm for a moment, and let's look together at verse 19. That's Psalm 34. Verse 19 acknowledges that we are in fact victims, because it says, "Many are the calamities of the righteous one." So he recognizes that. We've all got things that we have to deal with, and some have to deal with some very dramatic and even at times horrible circumstances. And Jehovah recognizes that. He says, "Many are the calamities of the righteous one." But please notice the next expression. Because it says, "But out of them all, Jehovah delivers him." What that tells us is that we are not helpless victims, but we are individuals who can find a way to live with, to deal with, to improve, to help ourselves, even amidst the problems in the system of things. So Jehovah says he will deliver us out of those. And that's not just talking about the future, brothers. That's talking about today. So it encourages us to say then, when we have things in our lives that really press in on us and make life difficult for us, then we should say, well, Jehovah promises he will deliver me. So what does the Bible say? What's the society written about this problem of mine? What can I do that can help me to deal with this and to overcome it, or at least to cope with it? And Jehovah promises to support us in doing that. So we don't have to feel like we're helpless victims, as the world would like to think. And sometimes our older brothers and sisters get to feeling like they've been victimized by old age. And, they come to the meetings and they say, I can't concentrate. I'm having a hard time reading. I can't remember. I don't even know if it's worth coming because, I go home. As soon as I'm out the door, I don't remember a thing that was said at the meetings. Well, if you've ever felt that way, turn to 2 Corinthians chapter 4 and verse 16. Well, it is true that we're victimized by growing old. There's no question about that. 2 Corinthians chapter 4 and verse 16 is very encouraging for our older brothers and sisters because it says, "Therefore, we do not give up. But even if the man we are outside is wasting away, certainly the man we are inside is being renewed from day to day." So Jehovah recognizes that, physically, things are going to break down and they're going to go wrong and they won't function the way they used to. But you notice he promises there, he says, but the man we are inside is being renewed from day to day. It doesn't say it might be renewed, it says it is. As long as we're willing to come. You see, this is where Jehovah's Spirit is. This is where the action is. This is where it happens. This is where Jehovah does his good deeds for us. So when you come here, even if you walk out, you don't remember a single thing. You benefited by being here. And so spiritually you keep nourishing the man inside. So we don't want to feel like we're helpless victims, brothers. We want to keep working at having Jehovah help us and assist us in these areas. Now here's another one. Of course you may not hear the world saying this, but you might have heard some brother or sister make this statement. Have you ever heard someone say, where does it say you have to pioneer to get in the new order? Have you ever heard that? Is that true? Is it true you don't have to pioneer to get in the new order? Oh, yeah. It is true. You don't have to. But what are they implying generally when they say, you don't have to pioneer to get in the new order? Aren't they kind of encouraging self-indulgence? Why do you push yourself like that for? Why do you do that? You don't have to pioneer to get in the new order. Is that the kind of thinking that Jehovah wants us to have? Certainly not, because if you take your Bible again and turn to Luke chapter 13 and verse 24, well, it may be true, brothers, you do not have to, as it were, pioneer to get in the new order. Look at what it says here in Luke 13 that is absolutely essential. Jesus said, exert yourselves vigorously to get in through the narrow door, because many, I tell you, will seek to get in, but will not be able. So going through the door means salvation, doesn't it? It's off into the new order. So what did it say there it would take in order to get through the narrow door? A skinny body? No. It says exertion. Exert yourself vigorously. So if you ever feel like you're pushing yourself to try to do God's will, if you come home tired, you spend the day out in service and, you're tired from that, be happy. Because it's exerting yourselves vigorously that Jehovah approves of. And for some, it does mean that, yes, you need to pioneer. If your circumstances allow it, or if you can make the circumstances, because Jehovah wants us to exert ourselves vigorously. And look, He's going to make it easier. Only 70 hours a month. Or 50 if you want to auxiliary. Yeah. And some of us, too, should give additional consideration to that, to auxiliary pioneering, because that's really what Jehovah would see in us, that we're exerting ourselves vigorously, and that will help us to get into the new order. Now, there's no question that pioneering and exerting ourselves is approved by Jehovah and His organization. After all, where do we tend to take brothers from for additional privileges? If you want to get to Bethel, best chance is to be a pioneer. If you want to go to Gilead, you got to be a pioneer. We look for brothers for extra privileges in the congregation. Well, there's a brother who's pioneering, and that's the way it works. The traveling overseers, they come from the ranks of the pioneers. So it's worth our while to really give serious thought to that. And something that's of real benefit to being a pioneer is that you become more organized. And some of us, when we came in the truth, we said, I just know Jehovah's going to make me organized. I can just see it. But that's good. It helps us. You can get more accomplished and do just as much and have a wonderful life. In fact, pioneers find that they're focused on what's important, and that really helps them not to be distracted, which is a primary problem in this system of things today. Let's think about another expression that you might hear. Parents, have you ever heard this? Well, you can't force them. Speaking about your kids, you can't force them. And that usually starts to happen about 12, 13, 14, 15. It's interesting, brothers. We're seeing today that even in the truth, some are adopting that. Well, you can't force them. Is that true? Well, yeah, it is, isn't it? I mean, you can't force them. You can't take a 15-year-old and force them to do something. Jehovah doesn't take you and grab you by the shirt and sit you down in the front seat of the Kingdom Hall and say, okay, you're coming to the meeting. He doesn't do that. He gives you the choice. But at the same time, you see, the world, in what they're saying, and we may be adopting to some degree, is that, well, I guess I can't do anything. And 14, 15, 16-year-olds are making the rules in the house. And the parents back off and say, well, what are you going to do? So it's good for us to think about that, because that thinking comes from the world. And if you take your Bible and turn to Galatians chapter 6 and verse 7, you may find this of some use as we think about raising our families today in the truth. You see, it says there in Galatians 6 and verse 7 that we should not be misled. God is not one to be mocked. For whatever a man is sowing, this he will also reap. Now, I'm not talking about parents reaping what they sow. I'm talking about children reaping what they sow. And sometimes that's good to keep in mind, parents, that children have to experience the consequences of the things that they do. Like when they go against parental direction, they need to have some consequences for that. And that's true, as children get older, it takes a little more ingenuity, a little more imagination to try to assist our young people to realize that, look, if you're going to break the house rules, there's going to be some consequences to this, because Jehovah's put us under charge to care for your interests. You know, one father, he decided that whenever his children demonstrated an attitude or did something that they weren't supposed to do, that he would take time every day, every single day, he would take time to either read principles from the Bible or an article from the Watchtower or the Awake or something like from the Young People Ask, until he was convinced that the attitude had changed. And then he'd leave it alone. And you know what? Every one of his children is in the truth and doing well. So, you see, he found ways to help his children to stick with the truth. One father, his son was got a little mischievous. Remember when they came out with the Nike running shoes with the air soles? You know, you can even see the little bubble in the heel, and they were real expensive runners. And one young fellow decided, well, let's see what will happen if you take a protractor and stick it in the heel there. And, of course, it deflated the heel, and it wasn't his running shoe. So here's a $120 pair of runners that are wrecked. Now, some parents would say, oh, well, you know, boys will be boys. But this father said, no, you're going to buy him a new pair of shoes. Oh, where am I going to get the money from? He says, well, you'll have to get a job. And so he made him go out and get a job, earn the money. But then he did the fatherly thing. He was still concerned about his son. And when the time came, he went out and helped him find a good deal on the shoes so he didn't have to pay full price. So he helped him out in that regard. But see, there was consequences to the things that he did. And we need to teach our young people that. They can't make the rules. And when you think about what it says in Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 4, you'll see why. Because it says, you fathers, do not be irritating your children, but go on bringing them up in the discipline and mental regulating of Jehovah. Now that expression there, but go on till when? When do you go on bringing them up till? Till they leave home. Yeah, till they leave home. So you have to keep at it. Don't get disheartened. Don't give up. Don't throw your hands up. But stick with the mental discipline and regulating of Jehovah until your children leave home. That's your God-given responsibility. And so it's good for us to withstand the pressure that the world has on us to try to think like them. And young people, have you ever heard this expression? Oh, you don't have to put up with that. Have you ever gone to school? You know, maybe you're a little upset with something that happened at home and you maybe grumbled about it at school and one of the kids said, you don't have to put up with that. You've probably heard that. Yeah. And yet, where does that thinking come from? Is that Jehovah's thinking? No. In fact, if you go back to verse 1, you'll just notice there it says, children, be obedient to your parents in union with the Lord, for this is righteous. And have you ever noticed that when you obey your parents, what's it like around the home? Everybody's happy, aren't they? Yeah. What happens when you decide to make your own rules? What happens? Everybody's happy? No. In fact, everybody's upset. If one person's unhappy in the home and upset, then everybody's affected. Yeah. So with good reason it says, be obedient to your parents. Now remember, we read to your parents there in Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 4 that fathers particularly should go on bringing them up in the discipline and mental regulating of Jehovah. You remember when they were going to go on doing that till you left home. Now that tells you something too. You see, listening to and obeying your parents has a time limit to it. It's temporary. And you know, in many cases it will end soon enough. And you'll be out on your own, and you'll have to make your own decisions, and you'll wish you had somebody there to help you. So why rush it? Let your parents train you and teach you, and then when you're on your own, then you can make all your own decisions and set all your own rules. In the meantime, your parents will try to give you a little bit of, what's the term? You know what I mean. They'll let the rope out a little bit, give you some opportunities to make your own decisions. But ultimately, it's up to them. They have to make those decisions. And so our working in harmony with that is to the benefit. So we want to avoid that thinking that, well, I don't have to put up with that. Well, we should want to put up with it until we move out on our own and make our own decisions. So it's evident, isn't it, brothers? I mean, we could go on with examples of different ways that we can think and ways that we need to think like Jehovah. You see, everything that we think has to be examined from the standpoint of the Scriptures. Our attitudes, our feelings about things, they all have to be examined. Where does this come from? Is this a scriptural way to look at things? Is this my own thinking? And when we look at things from that point of view, then we'll really begin to win the battle fighting against this system of things. And it'll protect us and keep us happy. So don't be disheartened. But we do need to show appreciation for Jehovah's Table, don't we? And we can do that by viewing it as our responsibility to adjust our thinking. We have to continually keep on doing that. And secondly, of course, we have to have the attitude of being progressive. We want to be motivated to be progressive. We want to come to the meetings. Every time we come, we want to come here to see, okay, now what can I take home with me tonight? What am I going to take home and practice? Each time we sit down to study and prepare for a meeting, we want to look at it and say, well, why do I need this? What's this going to do for me? And you'll find that we'll continue to grow and be spiritual people. And that's what we need. Now, we know you brothers are doing that, but we have to keep on doing it. Otherwise, Satan's going to distract us. And in many cases, he's doing a good job. Well, we can think about one other thing, too. We talked a little bit about eating physically at the beginning. Did you know that you could starve at a banquet? You could. You know, if you never bothered to eat anything, you could starve even though you were sitting there with all that food. In fact, the Bible even says that. It says, the lazy one has hidden his hand in the banquet bowl. He has become too weary to bring it back to his mouth. Can you picture it? You know, oh, I just can't do it. But you know what, brothers? Don't ever be like that spiritually. Don't ever be too weary to eat spiritually. Don't ever be too weary to take the time to stop and think about why Jehovah is feeding this. Why is He giving us this information? What's it going to do for me today? With that kind of spirit, we'll be sure to be spiritual people. And so be determined then, brothers, to follow through in the counsel in 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 2. Let's just read that together. 1 Peter chapter 2. It says, and as newborn infants form a longing for the unadulterated milk belonging to the Word, that through it you may grow to salvation. So be determined, brothers, to keep on feeding well spiritually, and Jehovah's going to bless you for that. So this week we're going to have a full week of activity. For example, our field service we're going to have tomorrow, Thursday and Friday at 9 o'clock here at the Kingdom Hall. We're also going to meet at 1 o'clock in the afternoon on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. There's a 6:45 field service arrangement for tomorrow evening. The regular pioneers, we'd like to meet with you tomorrow evening at 7 o'clock. So maybe just confirm that with me after the meeting this evening that you're going to be able to meet for that. Thursday evening we'll meet with the elders and ministerial servants. That's 7 o'clock. Now, Friday, there's something that you could do for me. If you get an opportunity to take some time this week to try to do a little research on Matthew chapter 13, particularly the illustration about the sower and the seed. Because we're going to talk about it Friday night. The theme of that part is God's kingdom. Are you getting the sense of it? So we're going to have a little discussion about that. So if you can come prepared for that, we'll have you participate in that meeting. Saturday morning, we're going to meet for field service at 10 a.m. And then what we'd like you to do is arrange to work right through the lunch period. In fact, you know what works best? Is if we decide that we want so many hours in the service. You know, if you say, well, I want 3 hours in the service, and then you just stay out till you have your 3 hours, and, you know, by 1:30 you could have 3 hours in the service. Or 2.5. You know, that works better than saying, well, you know, I want to quit at 12 o'clock. Saturday, try not to do that. Work right through lunch. That's the best time. Just the other week, we had 3 Bible studies started just before 12 o'clock and through the lunch period. So it seems to be the best time to work in service on Saturday. So why don't you arrange your affairs for that? Sunday, keep in mind our public talk, Are You Walking with God? And our concluding discussion is going to be For the Joy That Is Set Before Us. So I'll let you think about that. Anyways, it's going to be a full week, brothers. And of course, we'll go in field service at 12:15 after the meeting on Sunday. So it's lots to do. Hopefully you've arranged your fares to share in the ministry this week and any other things as well. So that brings our meeting to a close this evening, except for the fact that we'd like you to stand and sing a song. Let's sing about the value of the Bible, God's own book of treasure, Song 180. So as you stand and sing that song together, is it possible then if we could have Brother Yellowega, would you close our meeting with prayer for us, please?